The morning sun painted Denver International Airport in hues of amber and gold as Flight 2317 prepared for its routine journey to Seattle. Captain Thomas Mitchell adjusted his collar, a habit he'd developed over his 20 years of flying. At 53, with silver streaks adorning his temples, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a veteran pilot who had mastered the skies. "Weather forecast looks perfect today," remarked First Officer David Chun, his co-pilot of 5 years, as he completed the pre-flight checklist. At 34, David brought a fresh energy to the cockpit that complemented Thomas's experience. Clear skies all the way to Seattle. The boarding process proceeded smoothly, with passengers filing into the aircraft, their minds occupied with their own stories and destinations. Among them was Dr. Sarah Collins, a renowned ornithologist from the University of Washington, returning home after a conference. Her thoughtful green eyes scanned the cabin as she settled into seat 14A, clutching her weathered leather laptop bag containing months of research data. In row 22, Marcus Henderson, a quiet man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit, kept checking his watch nervously. His presence would later prove more significant than anyone could have imagined. The cargo hold beneath their feet held secrets that would soon transform this ordinary flight into something extraordinary. Flight attendant Jennifer Martinez moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, her warm smile masking any fatigue from the early morning start. "Welcome aboard," she greeted each passenger, her experienced eye noting those who might need extra attention during the flight. As the last passenger settled in, Thomas's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're looking at a smooth flight to Seattle today, with an estimated flight time of 2 hours and 45 minutes. The weather is cooperating beautifully, so we should have excellent conditions throughout our journey." The aircraft pushed back from the gate right on schedule, its engines humming to life with a familiar vibration that Sarah Collins had experienced countless times during her research trips. Yet something felt different today, a subtle tension in the air that she couldn't quite explain. As they taxied toward the runway, David noticed an unusual gathering of birds near the airfield. "That's strange," he mentioned to Thomas. "I've never seen so many birds congregating like that this early in the morning." Thomas glanced out the window, his experienced eyes narrowing slightly. "Probably just migrating," he replied, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. In all his years of flying, he'd never seen birds behaving quite like this. The takeoff was smooth, the aircraft lifting gracefully into the morning sky. As they climbed through the clouds, the passengers settled in for what they expected to be a routine flight. Sarah pulled out her laptop, planning to review her presentation on avian migration patterns, unaware that she would soon witness something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about bird behavior. In the cargo hold below, something stirred, a secret that would soon draw the attention of creatures whose intelligence and determination had been vastly underestimated by humans. As the aircraft reached its cruising altitude, the first signs of what would become an extraordinary chain of events began to unfold. Jennifer was just beginning the beverage service when she noticed something peculiar through the window. A formation of birds, larger than any she'd seen at this altitude, was approaching the aircraft. But these weren't just any birds. They were flying with what appeared to be purpose, their movements coordinated in a way that seemed almost strategic. Thomas and David exchanged glances as they noticed the same phenomenon on their instruments. The morning sun caught the wings of the approaching birds, creating an ethereal display that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so unsettling. Something unprecedented was about to happen at 35,000 feet above the Earth, something that would challenge the boundaries between the natural world and human technology. If this story has captured your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give us a like. Let us know which city you're watching from. We'll continue with our tale. The first indication that something was truly unusual came when Sarah Collins noticed the birds weren't dispersing as they normally would. Having spent years studying avian behavior, she knew that birds typically avoided aircraft, their natural instincts driving them away from the loud, imposing machines. But these birds were different. They seemed to be deliberately maintaining their proximity to the plane. In the cockpit, David Chin monitored their trajectory while keeping an eye on the unusual formation. "They're matching our speed," he reported to Thomas, unable to hide the note of concern in his voice. "I've never seen anything like this." Through the cabin windows, passengers watched in a mixture of fascination and growing unease as the flock of birds grew larger, more birds joining the formation with each passing minute. The sun caught their wings, creating dancing shadows across the cabin that gave the scene an almost otherworldly quality. Jennifer Martinez paused the beverage service, her professional demeanor slightly strained as she responded to increasingly worried questions from passengers. "It's probably just a migration pattern we're not familiar with," she assured them, though her eyes kept darting to the windows. In seat 14A, Sarah Collins had abandoned her laptop entirely, her attention fully captured by the extraordinary display outside. As one of the country's leading experts in avian behavior, she knew she was witnessing something unprecedented. The birds weren't just flying alongside the aircraft. They were organizing themselves in a pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose. Marcus Henderson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier nervousness now manifesting as visible anxiety. He kept glancing toward the rear of the aircraft, then back at the birds, his face growing paler with each passing moment. A flight attendant noticed his distress and approached with a cup of water. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" Jennifer asked, offering the water to Marcus. Yes, I'm fine," he responded quickly, too quickly, his eyes never leaving the window. "Just not fond of flying." In the cockpit, Thomas made a decision. "Denver Control, this is Flight 2317. We're experiencing an unusual situation with a large flock of birds maintaining position around our aircraft, requesting guidance and possible altitude adjustment." The response from air traffic control crackled through. "Flight 2317. Adjust altitude to 37,000 feet and alter course 5 degrees north. Monitor and report if the situation changes." As Thomas began the gentle ascent, Sarah Collins unbuckled her seatbelt and made her way to Jennifer. "Excuse me," she said quietly, showing her University of Washington ID. "I'm an ornithologist. What we're seeing, it's not normal bird behavior. Those are multiple species flying together in formation, something that simply doesn't happen naturally." Jennifer's professional smile faltered slightly. "Should we be concerned?" Sarah's response was measured but serious. "I'm not sure yet, but in 20 years of studying birds, I've never seen anything like this. They're not just following us. They're trying to tell us something." The aircraft continued its climb, but the birds adjusted their altitude in perfect synchronization, maintaining their position around the plane. The sky outside had become a canvas of swirling wings and determined creatures, their numbers still growing. In the cargo hold, unbeknownst to the passengers above, something stirred with more urgency now. The vibrations of movement traveled through the aircraft's frame, too subtle for most to notice, but adding to the growing sense that this flight was becoming anything but ordinary. Thomas's voice came over the intercom again, steady despite the unusual circumstances. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making some slight adjustments to our flight path. There's no cause for concern, but we do ask that everyone remain in their seats with their seatbelts fastened." As if in response to his announcement, the birds suddenly shifted their formation, concentrating more heavily around the rear of the aircraft. Their movements became more agitated, more purposeful, as if they were trying to communicate something specific about that section of the plane. Sarah Collins watched this new development with growing fascination and concern. In her career studying animal behavior, she had learned that when animals act in unusual ways, they often have very good reasons. Something was calling these birds, drawing them to this particular flight, to this particular moment in time. And whatever it was in the cargo hold below their feet. The atmosphere in the cabin grew increasingly tense as the bird formation tightened around the aircraft. Thomas and David maintained their professional composure, but the situation was testing their extensive experience. Every attempt to change course was met with an immediate adjustment from the avian escort, their movements displaying an uncanny level of coordination. "I've never seen birds fly this high for this long," David commented, his eyes fixed on the instruments. It's almost as if they're running on something other than normal endurance. Sarah Collins had become the unofficial expert on the situation, with several passengers now turning to her for explanations. She stood in the aisle, speaking quietly with Jennifer while keeping her voice steady to avoid causing panic. These birds are showing signs of what we call epimuletic behavior. Helping behavior, Sarah explained. It's common in mammals, but this level of cross-species cooperation among birds is unprecedented. They're acting as if they're responding to a distress call. Marcus Henderson's anxiety had become impossible to ignore. His expensive suit was now wrinkled from his constant fidgeting, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his forehead. Jennifer approached him again, this time more insistent in her concern. "Sir, you seem to be in distress. Is there something specific bothering you about the situation?" Before he could answer, a distinct sound emanated from beneath the cabin floor, a sound that caused the blood to drain from Marcus's face. It was faint, but unmistakable, a chorus of weak chirping, barely audible above the engine noise. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, her trained ear immediately recognizing it wasn't coming from outside the aircraft. She made her way to Jennifer, speaking in urgent but hushed tones. "There are birds in the cargo hold. That's what's causing this. The birds outside. They're responding to distress calls from below." In the cockpit, Thomas and David were dealing with their own concerns. The birds had begun flying even closer to the left engine, causing slight turbulence and making the aircraft harder to control. "We need to make a decision," David said, his voice tense. "If they get any closer to the engines..." Thomas nodded grimly. "Denver Control, Flight 2317. Situation escalating with bird activity. Requesting immediate clearance for emergency landing at nearest suitable airport." The response from air traffic control was immediate, but not encouraging. "Flight 2317, nearest suitable airport, is 3 hours off your current position. Weather conditions over Pacific waters are favorable. Recommend maintaining current altitude and speed while we coordinate alternatives." The tension in the cabin mounted as the aircraft experienced another bout of turbulence. Jennifer and her fellow flight attendants moved through the cabin, ensuring all passengers were securely seated and trying to maintain calm. Sarah had taken it upon herself to study the birds' behavior more closely. She noticed something peculiar about their formation. "They're not trying to threaten the plane," she announced to those around her. "Look at their flight pattern. They're guiding us somewhere." Marcus Henderson suddenly stood up, despite the fastened seatbelt sign. "You don't understand," he blurted out, his composure finally breaking. "They need air. The ventilation system, it's not enough." All eyes turned to him as the pieces began falling into place. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to determination. She turned to Jennifer. "We need to speak with the captain. Now!" "Those birds in the cargo hold. They're suffocating." The aircraft shuddered again, more violently this time, as the escort of birds grew even more agitated. Their movements became more urgent, their numbers still somehow increasing despite the high altitude and thin air. In the cockpit, Thomas and David watched their instruments with growing concern. The left engine's temperature was rising, strained by the constant proximity of the birds. They knew they would have to make a critical decision soon, one that would affect everyone on board. Jennifer's voice came through on the intercom. "Captain, we have an urgent situation regarding the cargo hold. Dr. Collins from the University of Washington has critical information about our situation." As Sarah made her way to the cockpit, the birds outside seemed to respond to the slightest change in the aircraft's movement, their synchronized dance becoming more complex and purposeful. Something extraordinary was happening, a demonstration of nature's intelligence and interconnectedness that would challenge everyone's understanding of the natural world. The next few minutes would prove crucial, as the truth about what lay in the cargo hold would force everyone on board to make difficult decisions that would test their humanity and their relationship with the natural world. Sarah Collins entered the cockpit with Jennifer, her professional demeanor masking the urgency she felt. "Captain Mitchell, there are birds in the cargo hold," she stated directly. "The birds outside aren't attacking us. They're trying to help their own kind." Thomas and David exchanged glances as Sarah continued. "I've studied avian behavior for decades, and this is extraordinary. These birds are showing levels of intelligence and cooperation we never thought possible. They're not just following us, they're trying to guide us to a safe landing. Marcus Henderson, who had followed them despite the flight attendant's protests, spoke up from behind. "It's my fault," he admitted, his voice shaking. "I'm a wildlife rehabilitator. There was no room in the local sanctuaries, and I was trying to transport rare birds to a new facility in Seattle. The shipping paperwork was delayed, but they couldn't wait." A sudden turbulence rocked the aircraft, causing everyone to grab for support. The left engine's temperature continued to rise, its readings now approaching critical levels. "We need to make an immediate decision," David announced, his eyes fixed on the instrument panel. "That engine won't hold out much longer with this constant bird activity." Thomas took a deep breath, years of experience helping him remain calm under pressure. "Mr. Henderson, exactly how many birds are we talking about?" 12 rare species, Marcus replied, his professional facade finally crumbling. They were supposed to be fine in the special transport containers, but something must have gone wrong with the ventilation system. Sarah's mind raced with calculations. At this altitude, with reduced cargo, hold pressure, "Captain, those birds don't have much time. The ones outside know this. That's why they're getting more aggressive. They can sense their companions' distress." Jennifer, who had been quietly listening, stepped forward. "Captain, I've seen similar transport containers in previous flights. They usually have emergency oxygen supplies, but they need to be manually activated." Thomas surveyed the situation with practiced efficiency. The birds outside had formed an even tighter formation around the aircraft, their movements becoming more urgent with each passing minute. The engine temperature was now dangerously high, and they were still hours from the nearest airport. "We have no choice," he declared. "We need to reduce altitude to increase air pressure and give those birds a chance. David, contact Denver Control. We're declaring an emergency and descending to 10,000 feet." As David began emergency procedures, Sarah moved closer to the cockpit window, studying the birds' reaction. "Look," she pointed out, "they're adjusting their formation. They know we're trying to help." The aircraft began its controlled descent, the dense flock of birds moving in perfect synchronization with their movements. The scene was both beautiful and surreal. Hundreds of birds coordinating their flight with a massive aircraft, all in an effort to save their trapped companions. Marcus wrung his hands anxiously. "The birds in the cargo hold, they're rare Philippine eagles. We were transferring them to a new breeding program. They're highly intelligent, and they form strong bonds with their own kind. That's why the wild birds are responding so strongly." Sarah's eyes widened at this information. "They're one of the most intelligent bird species known to science. Their problem-solving abilities are remarkable, and they form complex social bonds. This explains the unprecedented behavior we're witnessing." As the plane continued its descent, the temperature readings on the left engine began to stabilize. The birds outside maintained their escort position, but seemed calmer now, as if sensing the humans' efforts to help. Jennifer's voice came through the cabin intercom, steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning an emergency descent due to a situation in our cargo hold. Please remain in your seats with your seat belts fastened. We have everything under control." The truth about the cargo hold's precious contents had finally emerged, but they weren't out of danger yet. The next few minutes would be crucial as they attempted to save both the endangered birds and ensure the safety of everyone on board. The extraordinary display of avian intelligence and cooperation had created an unprecedented situation, one that would challenge the boundaries between humans and nature and test the limits of compassion and understanding. Thomas gripped the controls firmly, guiding the aircraft through its descent while keeping a watchful eye on the extraordinary escort surrounding them. This flight had become more than just an emergency. It had become a testament to the remarkable connection between all living beings and the lengths they would go to help their own kind. As Flight 2317 continued its controlled descent, the atmosphere in the cabin transformed from fear to fascination. Passengers pressed against windows, witnessing the extraordinary ballet of birds maintaining perfect formation around the aircraft. The morning sun caught their wings, creating a spectacular display of natural synchronization that few humans had ever witnessed. "We're passing through 20,000 feet," David announced, monitoring the instruments closely. "Engine temperatures are stabilizing, but we're burning fuel faster than anticipated with this descent rate." Sarah Collins had taken up position near the cockpit door, her expert commentary helping the flight crew understand the bird's behavior. "Look at how they're adjusting their formation," she observed, pointing to the way the flock shifted. "They're actually creating an aerodynamic advantage for THE plane, reducing our drag. This is revolutionary." In the main cabin, Jennifer and her fellow flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, ensuring passengers remained calm while discreetly preparing for any contingency. The professionalism of the crew helped maintain an atmosphere of controlled urgency rather than panic. Marcus Henderson sat rigid in his seat, his earlier anxiety now replaced with focused concern. "Those containers were supposed to maintain proper pressure," he explained to Sarah when she checked on him. "They're state-of-the-art equipment, used by the world's top conservation programs. Something must have malfunctioned in the primary ventilation system." A soft but distinct sound emanated from below. The chirping had grown stronger, more persistent. The birds outside responded with calls of their own, creating an ethereal symphony that penetrated even the aircraft's insulated walls. 15,000 feet, David called out. "Air pressure is increasing in the cargo hold. We should be seeing some improvement in conditions down there." Thomas maintained steady control of the aircraft while calculating their options. "We don't have enough fuel to reach Seattle at this altitude. We need to think about alternatives." Sarah's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The Olympic Peninsula," she said. "There's a wildlife sanctuary there with emergency landing facilities. They handle large cargo planes bringing in conservation supplies. I've done research there. They'll have everything we need for the birds." Thomas quickly consulted his charts. "It's within our fuel range, but we'll be cutting it close. David, contact Seattle Center and get clearance for an emergency landing at the sanctuary." The birds outside seemed to sense the change in plans, their formation shifting slightly as the aircraft adjusted its heading. Passengers murmured in amazement as the flock moved in perfect unison, like a living cloud responding to unspoken commands. Jennifer approached Sarah with a concerned look. "Dr. Collins, some passengers are asking if the birds will stay with us all the way to landing. They're worried about runway safety." Sarah shook her head in amazement. "What we're witnessing defies everything we thought we knew about avian behavior. These birds are demonstrating levels of intelligence and cooperation that will revolutionize our understanding of their cognitive abilities. But they're also showing something else. Empathy on a scale we never imagined possible in the animal kingdom." The cockpit radio crackled with response from Seattle Center, confirming clearance for the emergency landing. The sanctuary was being notified and would have emergency teams standing by. As they descended through 12,000 feet, the Philippine eagles in the cargo hold grew more vocal, their calls now clearly audible throughout the cabin. The wild birds outside responded in kind, their cries creating a haunting chorus that moved several passengers to tears. Marcus leaned forward in his seat, listening intently to the eagles' calls. "They don't sound distressed anymore," he noted with relief. "The increased air pressure must be helping. These birds, they're not just rare, they're sacred in their native lands. Some cultures believe they carry the spirits of their ancestors." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps there's more wisdom in those beliefs than we realized. What we're seeing today, it's going to change everything we thought we knew about animal consciousness and cooperation." The Olympic Peninsula began to emerge from the morning haze ahead, its majestic mountains and vast forests offering hope of sanctuary. The wild birds maintained their protective formation around the aircraft, their presence now feeling less threatening and more like an honor guard escorting precious cargo to safety. In the cockpit, Thomas and David prepared for the challenging approach ahead, knowing they would need to execute a perfect landing while maintaining the delicate balance between human safety and wildlife preservation. The next few minutes would test not just their flying skills, but humanity's ability to recognize and respond to the extraordinary intelligence and compassion being demonstrated by their unexpected avian escorts. The Olympic Peninsula's vast wilderness stretched below them, its ancient forests shrouded in morning mist. Flight 2317 maintained a steady descent, while the extraordinary escort of wild birds adjusted their formation with impossible precision. In the cockpit, Thomas and David worked in focused harmony, their years of experience being tested in ways they never imagined. Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary, this is Flight 2317 on emergency approach, David communicated. We have precious cargo aboard requiring immediate attention. Multiple endangered species in distress. Sarah Collins had become the unofficial bridge between the human and avian worlds unfolding around them. Her scientific mind struggled to process the unprecedented behavior she was witnessing. The wild birds are starting to create a funnel formation, she observed, pointing through the cockpit window. They're literally creating a flight path for us. Jennifer coordinated with ground staff through the aircraft's communication system. The sanctuary's emergency response team is assembling. They have veterinarians standing by and portable oxygen units ready. Marcus Henderson, still in his seat but noticeably calmer, shared more details about their precious cargo. These Philippine eagles are part of an international conservation program, he explained to nearby passengers. They're called Haribon in their native land, literally kingbird. They're considered sacred protectors of the forest. The wild birds outside seemed to validate his words, their synchronized movements creating patterns that appeared almost ceremonial. Passengers watched in awe as species that normally never interacted worked together, united in their mission to protect their endangered kin. 8,000 feet, David announced. Beginning final approach procedures. Thomas's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, we're preparing for landing at Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary. Please ensure your seats are in their upright position and your seatbelts are securely fastened. Sarah noticed something remarkable through the window. The birds are changing their behavior, she announced. Look, they're creating space for our landing approach while maintaining the protective formation. This goes beyond instinct. They're demonstrating advanced problem-solving abilities. In the cargo hold, the eagles' calls had transformed from distress to what seemed like communication with their wild escorts. The interchange of calls created a mysterious dialogue that vibrated through the aircraft's frame. Jennifer moved through the cabin one last time, ensuring everything was secure. She paused by Sarah's seat. Dr. Collins, the sanctuary team, is asking if you can assist them once we land. They've never dealt with anything like this before. Of course, Sarah agreed, her mind already racing with the scientific implications of what they'd witnessed. What we've seen today will revolutionize our understanding of avian intelligence. These birds aren't just acting on instinct. They're showing emotional intelligence, strategic thinking, and interspecies cooperation at a level we never thought possible. The sanctuary's runway came into view, its length stretching through a clearing in the pristine forest. Emergency vehicles lined the tarmac, their lights flashing in the morning sun. The wild birds began a choreographed movement, creating a clear corridor for the aircraft's final approach. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped together. In Philippine mythology, eagles are believed to be messengers between heaven and earth, he shared quietly. They say these birds carry wisdom that humans have forgotten. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. After what we've witnessed today, perhaps we need to reevaluate what we think we know about animal consciousness. These birds aren't just surviving. They're showing us the true meaning of compassion and cooperation. The aircraft descended through the last layer of clouds, the sanctuary's buildings now clearly visible. The morning sun cast long shadows across the runway as Thomas began the final approach. The wild birds maintained their escort, their movements becoming even more precise as they guided the aircraft towards safety. In these crucial moments, everyone aboard Flight 2317 understood they were part of something extraordinary, a moment when the barrier between human and animal worlds had somehow dissolved, revealing a deeper truth about the interconnectedness of all living things. The landing ahead would be challenging, but they were no longer alone in their effort. They had been joined by unexpected allies who demonstrated that the capacity for compassion knew no species bounds. The next few minutes would not only determine the fate of the endangered eagles in the cargo hold, but would also challenge humanity's understanding of their relationship with the natural world. As they descended toward the sanctuary, the Wild Birds escort had become more than just a spectacle. It had become a lesson in the true meaning of guardianship and the sacred bonds that connect all living creatures. The Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary's runway stretched before them like a ribbon cutting through the misty forest. Thomas began the final descent with practiced precision, his experienced hands steady on the controls despite the extraordinary circumstances. The Wild Birds maintained their escort formation, creating what Sarah called a living landing corridor, a sight that sanctuary staff would later describe as otherworldly. Gear down, Thomas commanded, his voice steady. Final approach initiated. David confirmed the landing gear deployment while monitoring the engine temperatures, which had finally stabilized at safer levels. Runway is clear. Emergency teams in position. Through the cabin windows, passengers watched in amazement as the Wild Birds executed a perfectly choreographed maneuver, splitting their formation to create clear sight lines for the pilots while maintaining their protective circle around the aircraft. The morning sun caught their wings, creating an ethereal display of natural synchronization. "I've never seen anything like this," Sarah breathed, her scientific mind racing to document every detail. "They're not just moving as a flock. They're responding to our flight path with calculated precision. Each species is playing a specific role in the formation." Jennifer moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring all passengers were properly secured for landing. The usual tension of an emergency landing was transformed by the awe-inspiring display outside. Even the most nervous flyers found themselves captivated by the unprecedented demonstration of nature's intelligence. Marcus Henderson sat with his hands folded, whispering what sounded like a prayer. In the Philippines, they say that when eagles show themselves to humans in unusual ways, they're trying to deliver an important message about our relationship with nature. Sarah glanced at him thoughtfully. Perhaps this is exactly that, a message about cooperation, about breaking down the barriers we've created between species. These birds are showing us what's possible when we work together. The sanctuary's emergency teams watched in stunned silence as Flight 2317 made its final approach, escorted by what one staff member would later estimate to be over 1,000 birds of various species, all moving in perfect harmony with the aircraft. 500 feet, David called out. Wind conditions stable. Thomas's voice came over the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making our final approach. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until we come to a complete stop." The Wild Birds began another remarkable maneuver, adjusting their formation to account for the ground effect as the aircraft descended. Their movements showed an understanding of aerodynamics that defied conventional wisdom about avian intelligence. 300 feet, David continued his countdown. Approach, angle perfect. Sarah noticed something remarkable about the birds' behavior. "Look at how they're creating air currents with their wings," she pointed out to Jennifer. "They're actually helping to stabilize our descent. This goes beyond anything we've ever documented in interspecies cooperation." As the aircraft descended through the last 100 feet, the morning sun broke through the clouds completely, illuminating the scene in golden light. The Wild Bird's wings caught the sunlight, creating a stunning display of natural iridescence that made several passengers gasp in wonder. In the cargo hold, the Philippine eagles had fallen silent, as if sensing their approaching salvation. The Wild Birds outside maintained their protective formation, their earlier agitation replaced by what seemed like focused determination to see their mission through. 50 feet, David announced. Runway clear. Jennifer and her fellow flight attendants took their landing positions, though their eyes, like everyone else's, were drawn to the extraordinary sight outside. The Wild Birds moved with the aircraft as one living entity, their wings creating patterns that seemed to dance with the morning light. The main landing gear touched down with a gentle bump, Thomas's decades of experience evident in the smooth contact. The Wild Birds adjusted their formation one final time, spreading out to allow the aircraft's full deceleration while maintaining their protective circle. As the aircraft slowed on the runway, the scale of what they had just experienced began to sink in. This wasn't just an emergency landing. It was a moment that would challenge humanity's understanding of the natural world and their place in it. Emergency vehicles began moving into position, their lights flashing in the morning sun, but they maintained a respectful distance, aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The wild birds remained in formation, now circling at a lower altitude, apparently unwilling to depart until they were certain their endangered kin were safe. Sarah Collins unbuckled her seatbelt, her mind already formulating the scientific papers that would arise from this extraordinary event. But more than that, she understood that she had witnessed something that transcended scientific explanation, a demonstration of nature's capacity for intelligence, cooperation, and compassion that would forever change how humans viewed their relationship with the natural world. As Flight 2317 came to a complete stop on the sanctuary's runway, a remarkable scene unfolded. The wild birds maintained their circular formation above the aircraft, their synchronized movements now taking on an almost ceremonial quality in the morning light. Emergency response teams approached carefully, their usual urgency tempered by the extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the sanctuary's chief veterinarian, coordinated with her team as they positioned mobile oxygen units and specialized transport equipment near the cargo hold. She had handled countless wildlife emergencies throughout her career, but nothing had prepared her for this. Dr. Collins, Jennifer called out as Sarah gathered her belongings. The sanctuary team is requesting your presence immediately. They need your expertise with this situation. Sarah quickly made her way toward the exit, pausing briefly beside Marcus. Come with me, she urged. Your knowledge of these eagles could be crucial. As the aircraft's doors opened, the cool morning air rushed in, carrying with it the sound of countless wing beats and calls from the wild birds above. The sanctuary staff stood in awe, watching the continued display of avian cooperation that defied all normal behavioral patterns. I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife medicine, Dr. Rodriguez commented as Sarah and Marcus approached. These wild birds, they're maintaining a protective formation even though we've landed. It's as if they're overseeing the rescue operation. The cargo hold door was carefully opened, revealing the special transport containers inside. Marcus immediately moved forward, his expertise evident in his careful handling of the equipment. The primary ventilation system malfunctioned, he explained to Dr. Rodriguez. But thanks to our escorts, we got here in time. Sarah observed the wild bird's reaction as the first container was carefully removed. Their formation tightened slightly, and their calls increased in intensity. They're responding to every movement we make, she noted. This level of awareness and coordination is unprecedented. The Philippine eagles inside the containers were alert and responsive, tired but largely unharmed thanks to the quick thinking of the flight crew and their extraordinary aerial escort. As each container was carefully moved to the sanctuary's transport vehicles, the wild birds above adjusted their formation, maintaining a protective circle over their endangered kin. Thomas and David had joined the group on the tarmac, still processing the remarkable experience they had just been part of. In all my years of flying, Thomas remarked, watching the rescue operation, I never imagined I'd see anything like this. Those birds up there, they knew exactly what they were doing. Dr. Rodriguez's team worked efficiently, providing supplemental oxygen and conducting quick health assessments of each eagle. Their vital signs are surprisingly good, she reported. Whatever these wild birds did up there, they helped us get these eagles here safely. The passengers watched from the aircraft windows, many recording the unprecedented scene on their phones. The morning sun created halos around the circling birds above, adding to the mystical quality of the moment. Jennifer coordinated with ground staff to arrange transportation for the passengers, but few seemed eager to leave. They understood they were witnesses to something extraordinary, a moment when the natural world had demonstrated capabilities that would challenge human understanding. Marcus worked alongside the sanctuary team, his expertise proving invaluable as they prepared to transfer the eagles to the facility's specialized care unit. In Philippine culture, he shared with Dr. Rodriguez, it's believed that eagles choose when and how to reveal their wisdom to humans. Today, they've shown us something profound about cooperation and compassion. Sarah was documenting everything she could, knowing that this event would revolutionize the field of animal behavior studies. What we're witnessing goes beyond instinct or learned behavior, she explained to the gathering of sanctuary staff. These birds have demonstrated complex problem-solving, emotional intelligence, and interspecies cooperation at a level we never thought possible. Above them, the wild birds continued their vigil, their formation now taking on a slower, more peaceful rhythm. As each Philippine eagle was safely transferred to the sanctuary's care, their calls seemed to change in tone, from urgent protection to what almost sounded like a celebration. Dr. Rodriguez looked up at the extraordinary display above them. Perhaps, she mused, we've been asking the wrong questions all along. Instead of studying how animals think like us, maybe we should be learning how they think differently, and what that could teach us about intelligence and consciousness. The morning sun had fully risen now, its rays catching the wings of the circling birds and creating a spectacular natural light show. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing not just a rescue operation, but a moment of transformation in humanity's understanding of their relationship with the natural world. The sanctuary's specialized care unit buzzed with focused energy as the Philippine eagles were carefully settled into their temporary homes. The wild birds that had escorted Flight 2317 maintained their presence, though their formation had relaxed into a gentler circling pattern above the facility. The morning's extraordinary events had transformed the sanctuary into an impromptu center for what many were already calling a paradigm shift in our understanding of animal intelligence. Dr. Rodriguez's team worked efficiently, conducting thorough health assessments of each eagle, while Sarah Collins and Marcus Henderson provided valuable insights. The birds were responding remarkably well to treatment, their resilience apparent in their alert eyes and responsive behavior. Their vital signs are stabilizing beautifully, Dr. Rodriguez announced, checking the latest readings. Whatever these wild birds did up there, they didn't just guide the plane. They bought us precious time. Sarah stood by the observation window, her attention divided between the recovering eagles and their extraordinary guardians above. We need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about avian intelligence, she said, rapid-firing notes into her tablet. The level of coordination we witnessed wasn't just remarkable, it was revolutionary. Outside, news of the unprecedented event had begun to spread. Wildlife experts and researchers from nearby institutions were arriving, drawn by reports of the extraordinary display of interspecies cooperation. The wild birds showed no signs of departing, their continued presence adding to the growing sense that something profound was unfolding. Jennifer had organized comfortable accommodations for the passengers at a nearby lodge, but many chose to stay at the sanctuary, captivated by the unfolding story. They gathered in small groups, sharing their perspectives on what they'd witnessed, their conversations filled with wonder and speculation. Marcus worked closely with the sanctuary staff, sharing his knowledge about Philippine eagle behavior and care. In their native habitat, these eagles are considered symbols of balance between the physical and spiritual worlds, he explained to an attentive group of researchers. Today, they've shown us that this balance exists in ways we never imagined. Thomas and David, having completed their necessary reports, joined the growing audience at the sanctuary. The veteran pilots found themselves repeatedly asked to describe the precision and intelligence displayed by their avian escorts during the flight. It wasn't just that they followed us, David explained to a group of fascinated observers. They anticipated our needs, created aerodynamic advantages, and somehow understood exactly what the situation required. This goes beyond anything in our training or experience. Sarah had set up an impromptu research station, coordinating with colleagues around the world who were eager to understand the implications of what had occurred. The behavioral patterns we observed challenge every existing model of avian cognition, she explained during a video conference with leading experts. These birds demonstrated not just problem-solving abilities, but emotional intelligence, strategic planning, and interspecies empathy at unprecedented levels. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the care unit with an update that brought smiles to everyone's faces. All 12 eagles are responding exceptionally well, she announced. Their stress levels are remarkably low considering what they've been through. It's almost as if they knew help was coming, as if they understood that their wild cousins wouldn't abandon them. The wild birds above seemed to respond to the positive news, their calls taking on what many described as a more melodic quality. Their continued presence had attracted the attention of local indigenous elders, who arrived at the sanctuary with their own perspectives on the extraordinary events. Our ancestors spoke of times when animals would reveal their true nature to humans, shared Elizabeth Blackfeather, a respected tribal elder who had been invited to the sanctuary. They taught us that such moments come not just as displays of nature's power, but as lessons humanity needs to learn. As the day progressed, the sanctuary became a unique convergence of scientific observation and spiritual reflection. Researchers worked alongside traditional knowledge keepers, each bringing their own perspectives to understanding the profound demonstration of intelligence and cooperation they had witnessed. Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to these conversations that bridged scientific and traditional understanding. Perhaps we've been too rigid in our scientific definitions of intelligence and consciousness, she reflected. What we witness today suggests that the natural world holds depths of wisdom and capability that we're only beginning to understand. The Philippine eagles, now resting comfortably in their temporary quarters, seemed to radiate a calm that influenced everyone in the facility. Their wild guardians maintained their vigil above, their presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary bonds that connected all living beings. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary grounds, those present understood that they were part of a moment that would challenge and change humanity's relationship with the natural world. The events of this day would not just fill scientific journals. They would open hearts and minds to new possibilities of understanding and cooperation between species. As evening approached, the Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary had transformed into an unprecedented gathering of minds and spirits. The wild birds maintained their vigilant circle, though their formation had evolved into a more relaxed pattern that created beautiful shapes against the darkening sky. Inside the facility, the Philippine eagles were thriving under expert care, their recovery exceeding all expectations. Sarah Collins stood in the sanctuary's conference room, now converted into a hub of scientific discovery. Screens displayed video footage from Flight 2317, while researchers from around the world joined virtually to analyze the extraordinary events they'd witnessed. The walls were covered with hastily created charts tracking bird behavior patterns that defied all existing models of avian intelligence. What we're seeing here, Sarah explained to the assembled group, isn't just unprecedented, it's revolutionary. These birds demonstrated complex problem-solving abilities, emotional intelligence, and interspecies cooperation at levels we never thought possible. They didn't just react to the situation. They anticipated, planned, and executed sophisticated strategies. Dr. Rodriguez entered the room with the latest medical reports, her face bright with excitement. The eagle's recovery is remarkable, she announced. Their stress levels are lower than we typically see even in routine transfers. It's as if the presence of their wild guardians is having a direct positive effect on their recovery. Outside, Marcus Henderson worked with sanctuary staff to document every detail of the specialized transport containers, determined to understand what had triggered the malfunction and ensure it never happened again. But his technical analysis was repeatedly interrupted by moments of pure wonder as he watched the continuing display above. In Philippine mythology, he shared with a group of fascinated observers. Eagles are believed to be able to bridge the physical and spiritual worlds. Today, they've bridged something else, the gap between human understanding and natural wisdom. Elizabeth Blackfeather had been invited to share her people's traditional knowledge with a gathering of scientists and researchers. Her presence added a deeper dimension to the ongoing analysis. Our stories speak of times when animals would reveal their true nature to humans, she explained, her voice carrying quiet authority. But these revelations were never meant to be merely observed. They were meant to be understood and integrated into our way of being. As if responding to her words, the wild birds above began a new pattern of flight, creating intricate designs that drew gasps from observers. Several ornithologists present began rapid documentation, noting how multiple species were cooperating to create these complex aerial formations. Thomas and David, who had chosen to stay at the sanctuary rather than return to their hotel, found themselves repeatedly sharing their experience with various research teams. The precision they showed, Thomas explained, went beyond anything we've seen in nature. They weren't just following the aircraft, they were actively supporting our emergency procedures. Jennifer, who had remained to help coordinate passenger needs, organized an impromptu gathering where witnesses could share their perspectives. The stories that emerged painted a picture of an event that had transformed not just scientific understanding, but personal worldviews. "I've always thought of animals as being driven purely by instinct," one passenger shared. "But what we saw today, that was something different. That was wisdom." As night began to fall, the sanctuary's exterior lights came on, creating a gentle illumination that allowed continued observation of the wild birds. Their numbers had actually grown throughout the day, with new species joining the aerial vigil in a display of unity that defied conventional understanding of avian behavior. Sarah found herself drawn into a conversation with Elizabeth Blackfeather and Dr. Rodriguez, three different perspectives converging on a shared sense of wonder. "Perhaps," Sarah mused, "we've been asking the wrong questions all along. Instead of trying to measure animal intelligence by human standards, we should be opening ourselves to different forms of wisdom." Dr. Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Today has shown us that the capabilities of the natural world far exceed our previous understanding. These birds haven't just demonstrated intelligence. They've shown us a kind of consciousness that we're only beginning to comprehend." Elizabeth smiled, watching the continuing display above. "In our traditions, we speak of moments when the natural world chooses to reveal its deeper truths to humanity. These moments come not when we demand them, but when we most need to learn from them." The Philippine eagles, now resting peacefully in their temporary homes, had become the center of a profound shift in human understanding. Their remarkable rescue, made possible by an unprecedented display of natural intelligence and cooperation, had opened new pathways of scientific inquiry and spiritual reflection. As the evening deepened, those present at the sanctuary understood that they were witnessing not just the aftermath of an extraordinary rescue, but the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's relationship with the natural world. The wisdom displayed in the skies above Flight 2317 had initiated a transformation that would ripple through scientific communities, cultural understanding, and human consciousness itself. As the sanctuary prepared for nightfall, something extraordinary began to unfold in the darkening sky. The wild birds, which had maintained their vigilant presence throughout the day, initiated what observers would later describe as a symphony of flight, an unprecedented display of coordinated movement and communication that seemed to transcend natural behavior. Sarah Collins, who had been documenting every aspect of this remarkable day, stood transfixed alongside Dr. Rodriguez and Elizabeth Blackfeather. The birds above had begun forming complex, shifting patterns that appeared to tell a story through movement. Species that normally never interacted were working in perfect harmony, creating aerial formations that defied conventional understanding of avian behavior. "Look at this," Sarah breathed, her scientific mind racing to comprehend what she was witnessing. "They're not just flying together. They're creating something, a message, perhaps, or a demonstration of what's possible when barriers between species fall away." Inside the care unit, the Philippine eagles showed a remarkable response to the display above. Their calls synchronized with those of their wild guardians, creating a haunting melody that filled the sanctuary grounds. Dr. Rodriguez checked their vital signs with growing amazement. "Their stress levels are continuing to decrease," she reported, studying the monitors. "It's as if they're participating in whatever is happening up there, even from inside the facility." The connection between these birds goes beyond anything we've documented before. Marcus Henderson, who had spent years working with endangered species, found himself overwhelmed by the significance of what they were witnessing. "In all my years of wildlife rehabilitation," he shared with the gathered observers, "I've never seen anything like this. These birds aren't just demonstrating intelligence. They're showing us a whole new way of understanding consciousness and connection." The sanctuary had become crowded with witnesses to this unprecedented event. Wildlife experts, researchers, local residents, and passengers from Flight 2317 stood together, united in their sense of wonder. The aerial display above had taken on an almost ceremonial quality, with waves of birds moving in patterns that seemed to respond to the eagle's calls from within the facility. Elizabeth Blackfeather watched the unfolding scene with deep understanding. Our ancestors spoke of times when the natural world would reveal its true nature to humanity, she explained to the spellbound gathering. These moments were seen not as spectacles to be observed, but as teachings to be integrated into our understanding of life itself. Thomas and David, the pilots whose skilled handling of Flight 2317 had made this moment possible, stood watching the display with professional admiration. What they did up there, Thomas reflected, wasn't just extraordinary flying. It was a demonstration of intelligence and cooperation that challenges everything we thought we knew about the natural world. Jennifer, who had remained at the sanctuary to support the passengers, noticed something remarkable. "Look at how everyone's responding," she whispered to Sarah. "It's not just wonder. It's like we're all part of something bigger, something transformative." She was right. The gathered crowd had fallen into a reverent silence. All eyes turned skyward as the wild birds continued their mesmerizing performance. Scientists stood shoulder to shoulder with spiritual leaders, pilots alongside passengers. All barriers of profession and perspective dissolved in the face of something profound and unifying. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the care unit with an announcement that added another layer of wonder to the moment. "The Eagle's vital signs are synchronizing," she reported, her voice filled with amazement. Not just with each other, but with the rhythms of the birds above. It's as if they're all connected in some way we've never understood before. Sarah found herself reaching for new ways to describe what she was witnessing. "What we're seeing here," she explained to the assembled researchers, "goes beyond any existing paradigm of animal behavior. These birds are demonstrating a form of collective consciousness that we didn't even know was possible." The wild birds above seemed to respond to her words, their formation shifting into what appeared to be a massive, coordinated dance. Different species moved in and out of complex patterns, their wings catching the last rays of sunlight in a display that brought tears to many observers' eyes. Marcus, watching the Philippine eagles respond to the display from their recovery enclosures, shared a final insight from his years of working with these magnificent creatures. "These birds have always been considered sacred in their homeland," he said quietly. "Now we're beginning to understand why. They're not just intelligent. They're bearers of wisdom that humanity is only now ready to receive." As night settled over the sanctuary, the wild birds display reached a crescendo of coordination and beauty that would be forever etched in the memories of all who witnessed it. This wasn't just a demonstration of natural behavior. It was a moment of profound connection between species, a bridge between human understanding and natural wisdom that would change the way humanity viewed its relationship with the natural world. The events unfolding at the Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary were more than just a scientific marvel or a spiritual revelation. They were a glimpse into possibilities that would reshape humanity's understanding of consciousness, intelligence, and the deep connections that bound all living things together. The dawn of a new day broke over the Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary, bringing with it a profound sense of transformation. The events of the previous day had changed not just scientific understanding, but the hearts and minds of all who witnessed them. The wild birds remained. Their numbers now included species that had traveled from far and wide, as if drawn by an invisible call to participate in this unprecedented gathering. Sarah Collins stood in the observation room, reviewing the preliminary data from the past 24 hours. The numbers told an extraordinary story. Multiple species cooperating in ways never before documented, complex problem-solving behaviors that defied existing models of avian intelligence, and evidence of emotional intelligence that would revolutionize the field of animal cognition. "What we've witnessed here," she explained to a gathering of international researchers who had arrived overnight, "isn't just an isolated incident. It's a window into capabilities that have always existed in the natural world, capabilities we're only now beginning to understand." The Philippine Eagles had made a remarkable recovery, their strength returning under the constant vigilance of their wild guardians. Dr. Rodriguez's latest medical report showed something extraordinary. The birds' biometric readings suggested levels of wellness that surpassed even their baseline health measurements. It's as if the presence of their wild kin has accelerated their healing, she explained, showing the charts to her colleagues. We're seeing patterns of recovery that challenge everything we know about avian physiology and stress response. Marcus Henderson, working with sanctuary staff, had already begun implementing changes to wildlife transport protocols based on what they'd learned. This event hasn't just taught us about animal intelligence, he shared. It's shown us that we need to fundamentally rethink how we approach wildlife conservation and rehabilitation. The passengers from Flight 2317, who had chosen to stay and witness the unfolding events, gathered for one final time before departing. Their conversations revealed how deeply the experience had affected them. I used to think of animals as being driven purely by instinct, one passenger reflected. But what we saw yesterday, that was wisdom. That was love. That was something we don't even have words for yet. Jennifer, who had coordinated tirelessly throughout the event, organized a farewell ceremony that brought together all who had been part of this extraordinary experience. Thomas and David, the pilots whose skilled response had made everything possible, stood alongside Dr. Rodriguez, Sarah, Marcus, and Elizabeth Blackfeather. Sometimes Elizabeth shared with the gathered crowd, "The greatest teachings come when we least expect them, but most need them." These birds haven't just shown us their capabilities. They've shown us the possibility of a world where barriers between species fall away in the face of compassion and common purpose. As if responding to her words, the wild birds above began one final display. Species that had never been known to fly together moved in perfect harmony, creating patterns that seemed to write a new chapter in the story of life on Earth. The Philippine Eagles in the sanctuary called out to their wild kin, their voices joining in a chorus that moved many observers to tears. Thomas, the veteran pilot who had seen countless wonders in his years of flying, summed up what many were feeling. "In all my years in the sky, I thought I understood what was possible up there. But these birds haven't just shown us new possibilities in flight. They've shown us new possibilities in life itself." Sarah's research team had already begun preparations for long-term studies based on what they'd witnessed. "This event will change our understanding of animal intelligence and consciousness," she explained. "But more importantly, it's changing our understanding of our own place in the natural world." As the morning progressed, the wild birds began a gradual departure, their formations dissolving into smaller groups that spiraled away into the bright sky. But their impact would remain, not just in scientific papers and research studies, but in the transformed perspectives of all who had witnessed their extraordinary display of intelligence, cooperation, and compassion. The Philippine Eagles would remain at the sanctuary until arrangements could be made for their safe transport to their new home in Seattle. But they were different now, stronger, more connected to their wild kin, living proof of capabilities that humans were only beginning to understand. Dr. Rodriguez, watching the last of the wild birds depart, shared a final observation. "We came into this thinking we were saving endangered birds. But in the end, they've given us something far more precious, a new understanding of what's possible when we open our hearts and minds to the wisdom of the natural world." As the gathered observers began their own departures, returning to lives that would never be quite the same, they carried with them not just memories of an extraordinary event, but a profound new appreciation for the intelligence, consciousness, and connection that bound all living things together. The events at Olympic Wildlife Sanctuary would be studied for years to come, but their true impact couldn't be measured in data or documents. It lived in the transformed understanding of those who witnessed it, in the new possibilities they now saw in the world around them, and in the hope they carried for a future where humans and nature could work together in ways they had only begun to imagine. Queridos ouvintes, esperamos que esta extraordinária jornada dos céus tenha tocado seus corações e expandido suas mentes. Para continuar explorando histórias igualmente inspiradoras sobre as maravilhas do mundo natural, preparamos uma playlist especial que você pode encontrar clicando no link à esquerda. Se esta história o moveu, Não se esqueça de se inscrever em nosso canal e dar um like no vídeo. Todos os dias, trazemos histórias únicas que exploram as infinitas possibilidades de conexão e compreensão entre todas as formas de vida. Compartilhe seus pensamentos e experiências nos comentários abaixo. Juntos, podemos continuar descobrindo e celebrando os milagres que nos cercam. Até a próxima história!